Hello and welcome to the What is JavaScript lecture. In this lecture, we're just going to give you a brief understanding of what JavaScript is and how it applies to websites and web pages. So JavaScript is where we're finally getting into an actual programming language. HTML and CSS are really just markup and declarative type instructions that we give to the browser. But in JavaScript, we can give a lot more functionality to what we're writing by providing logical operations and mathematical operations to the computer to do something very specific and new that the browser doesn't even understand yet. You get to create it and make all that up yourself.
Yeah, you get to teach the browser how to interact with your web page.
Right. So when you click a button and something happens, that's because of JavaScript that's been written to make that button do something in particular. And you have to come up with those things yourself. So it's a very logical process of breaking down what it is you're trying to accomplish and then turning that into instructions that the computer can understand. And those instructions are called syntax. And syntax is just the specifics of how we lay out our JavaScript. So think of it like in English, we have grammar, and that says how a sentence should be structured. We have subjects, verbs, nouns. And in JavaScript, it's the same way. We have different conditions and different ways that the code needs to be structured in order for the computer to understand it. And if you don't put it in that structure, the computer won't understand what to do with it, and you'll get errors. So let's look at a basic operation that we can give to the computer through JavaScript. And it can be something as simple as putting 2 plus 2 on the screen.
Yeah, JavaScript is very mathematical. So every mathematical operation can become a valid JavaScript operation.
Yeah, so we can do 2 divided by 2, 2 times 2, 2 minus 2.
Now, we're not necessarily performing anything useful here, but we are still typing out valid JavaScript.
Right. So in order for this to be used, we'd have to use variables and other constructs of the language that we're not going to get into right now. But the main thing that you want to understand is that JavaScript is just another file, just like an HTML file or a CSS file, but it contains the code for your application that tells the browser exactly what you want to do with your HTML that's on the screen. And it can also do things like make requests to servers to pull back other information. There's just a myriad of different things that we can do with JavaScript that's going to take us a while to go through in that section and figure out. But we just want you to understand that JavaScript is where the coding and magic actually happens. It's the key to everything. HTML and CSS are great, but they're pretty easy to understand. They're just markup. There's very specific rules that you have to follow with HTML and CSS. So a lot of people don't get as tripped up with that because they have these rules and they say, this is how I use CSS. This is how I use HTML. You can only do certain things. But in JavaScript, you're unlimited. If you write valid code that the computer understands, it'll do it. Whatever you want it to do.
So it's very important as we go into the further lectures that you pay close attention to the syntax, the way we're typing out the code, because when you're writing your own code, you're going to need to use the same syntax. And when we're talking about syntax, what we mean is like the plus sign there or the semicolon. We're going to use curly braces at some point. We're going to use brackets. We'll use quotes, and we'll use parentheses, all kinds of different things.
Yeah, like this is an example of
that's a specific syntax.
Right. So if I didn't have these parentheses here, for instance, this wouldn't work. If I didn't have 2 equal signs here, it wouldn't be the same thing. If I didn't have these curly braces, I wouldn't be able to put any more code in here. So we have to know this syntax, which we're going to dig into all of this in future videos, but we want you to understand that JavaScript provides interactivity to your web page, and it's totally up to you with how it works. And it's a very creative process, but it's also it is sort of structured at the same time. It's really interesting as you get into it, and it's fun to do because it's all up to you. But you need to understand that, in that process of putting your logic together, that there's some things that you're going to have to create on your own, and there's some things, rules that you need to follow about the language itself.
And try not to get too overwhelmed with, how am I supposed to know that I have to type this character here or something like that. It's more important over time. You're going to be seeing more JavaScript, writing more JavaScript, and you'll recognize the patterns in the syntax and the rules of the language. And then you'll be able to apply just basic logic that you would apply to solving problems elsewhere in the world into your JavaScript.
Yeah, and we're going to give you lots of tools and drills to do to really hone in on those things so that you really get them in your mind and understand how they work. And then as you apply them to other places in your code, it'll just become more natural to you. Like, we don't even think about it anymore. It's just how it works. And then you can apply all of these same concepts that we do in JavaScript exist in every programming language. So once you learn one, it's really easy to pick up another. We just like to use JavaScript because it's something that we can use on the web in a browser that we all are familiar with. Mm-hmm. And now we can use it on the server as well, which is really cool, which we do in other courses outside of front-end fundamentals. So that's JavaScript. I know that this is probably incredibly vague and ambiguous at this point, but as we dig into it in future sections, it'll start to make more sense. So that's it for now. JavaScript are files that provide interactivity, and we will dig into those later. But now let's go really start to dive deep into HTML, and we'll see you next.